All right, we are going to welcome Nate Fischer to the stage right now. Nate is the founder of American Reformer, which is a publishing, an online publishing house. He's also the founder of New Founding, which is an America-centric venture capital fund. So Nate's become a friend in the last few months, and again, just have heard more and more about what they're doing, and doing a lot of really interesting things. So go ahead and welcome Nate.
It is great to be here, and as I was thinking about, in many ways, the broad mission of New Founding, the broad mission of what I've been working on for really the last formally the last 3.5 years, but several years beyond that, I realized the subject of this conference, God and Bitcoin, symbolically encapsulates the twin pillars of what I believe our movement needs. We need renewed Christianity, and we need an embrace of the changes that digital transformation will bring. I mean that second one particularly in a strategic sense that I think is a divergence from how a lot of conservatives think about things. I think probably for people in this room, obviously more familiar. There's a lot to debate about exactly what these should look like. My friend Artie Antola has for years been advocating Bitcoin monasteries, which is a particularly interesting take on this, applies it in the direction of essentially taking on universities as the fundamental coming of age and credentialing institution of society. Others, I think, take a more materialistic approach. They'll focus on, I don't mean that necessarily in a bad sense, but they'll focus on Bitcoin's monetary implications and the disruption that this can pose to the incumbent global American empire. I see value to both of these angles. In many ways, the latter one I think would be epitomized by the sovereign individual, which talks about the technological determinism of the nature of regime shapes based on the dominant technology of the era and the return on violence. Obviously, the former, much more focused, Artie and Eastern Orthodox, and really comes from an approach that is centered on the liturgies and the way the church shapes all of these. Both of those really shape my thinking. What I'm going to lay out today is the strategy and vision that I see as offering the greatest opportunity, both for my company, for New Founding, and then for our broader movement within this paradigm. Specifically, I'm going to preview for you key parts of a manifesto on this topic that I've been developing over the past month. And for the first time, really in these 3.5+ years, bringing together a lot of the thought that's gone into why I'm doing what I'm doing. So far, I've only shared this with a few close allies, and I'm still tweaking it before release. So I'd value your input based on what I say today. What, if anything, really resonates, inspires, if anything, raises significant questions that need to be defended or significant disagreements. So to jump into this, why do I believe that our strategy offers the strongest path to regime-level victory? What I see is that we're at the end of a civilizational cycle. The great macro forces are reshaping the world and will continue to reshape the world, and this will touch every domain of society. I think the coming years will bring turmoil and peril. They'll also bring great opportunity, perhaps the first in nearly a century, to forge new models and institutions that can meaningfully shape the direction of Western civilization. Many Americans are apprehensive about this future. Again, people here may be probably some mix of that, more excited, tend to appreciate technology, but technological change does undermine established norms and traditions, and that makes conservatives nervous. However, the post-Cold War international order is fracturing, societal trust is collapsing, political volatility is increasing. The assassination attempt against Trump highlighted the real possibility of catastrophic violence. So while these conditions create great risk, there are major trends driving them that will strike at the heart of the legacy system and of the left's power base. In a sense, this reshuffles the deck. It opens new paths to those seeking change in societal direction. Instead of facing a long uphill battle in established institutions, again, something that many people inclined toward disruptive technology find incredibly painful and tedious, if that feels like our call, we can instead focus on projects and strategies that will have the greatest impact in this new order. What does this look like? In terms of these disruptive forces, there are three major ideologies, globalism, managerialism, and liberalism, that defined the 20th century. They intertwined to shape both the form and the values of our leading institutions. Essentially, you look at almost all of the leading institutions, the ruling class institutions of society, and they're global in form. They're bureaucratic or managerial in structure, and they're liberal, ranging toward radical liberalism in values. This inherently progressive global system also grew anti-Christian and anti-human. It did so implicitly by replacing Christian norms and institutions with liberal ones, and it did so explicitly by advancing ideological claims in direct conflict with Christian morals and anthropology, both of which served as core pillars of Western civilization or of Christendom. This rejection of Christianity thus became a quasi-suicidal rejection of the entire Western heritage that's led to widespread self-doubt and self-hatred among Western elites. Each of the core traits of this order is now being challenged, though, and this is the disruption. There's countervailing trends, in many ways a reversal of some of the dominant trends of the post-World War II and certainly post-Cold War era. We're seeing growing global disruption, challenging globalism. We're seeing bureaucratic stagnation, challenging the belief that the managerial form of organization is the most effective. And we're seeing widespread cultural and political alienation across the board as people reject some of the, especially some of the more radical forms of liberalism and liberation that's pushed by these institutions. These aren't simply values or preferences of ours. They're rising forces that are objectively threatening the legacy regime. Digital technology is a key driver of these macro trends. I don't need to defend this to this group, but here are a few high-level points of how digital technology is driving this. First of all, digital transformation will fundamentally disrupt bureaucratic organizations. I like to say that AI will not replace people, but AI will replace bureaucrats. That is going to strike at the heart of really the ruling class and fundamentally the capability and power of the managerial ruling class of our society. You're going to see pervasive algorithms undermine even the prospect of neutrality that's central to liberal dogmas. So often, even conservatives have embraced this idea of neutrality as the ideal that we should strive for. Common carrier style networks. We want our major institutions to just be common carriers that allow different viewpoints to come together. But I would say that instead of these networks, what we're seeing in the digital era are things that are inherently values laden. So think of Google. In a Google search result, there must be a #1 search result. There must be a #2 result, a #10 result, and so forth. And there must be a value system by which 1 is ranked higher than 2. That is not a world where we can just punt to neutrality, and those sorts of algorithms are mediating more and more of life. I don't think that's novel. I actually think throughout much of society, there were always implicit value systems that would shape what was elevated to that 1 result by society and #2. Liberalism in many ways tried to create this contrived illusion that we could have a pluralistic society with neutrality at the top. That's disappearing, and we're going to be forced to confront that. For our strategy, I would say that while controlling the technology itself is one source of power in the digital age, political actors who master these technologies and master the political and social phenomena emerging from them could be as influential as the technologists themselves. One dynamic that we're going to see rise is the role of religion. So as the centralized institutions of the liberal order are supplanted by algorithms and digital networks, religion will rise as both a crucial coordinating mechanism across what can often be very disparate and difficult to centrally manage networks. And it will also rise as a successor to the purported neutrality of liberal systems. In a sense, as a former colleague of mine, James Poulos, put it, the central question of the digital era will be, who catechizes the bots? In this world, both wokeism and transhumanism are rising as contenders in the digital domain alongside established religions. But Christianity is the true alternative. In an era of moral and epistemological chaos, a strong and confident Christianity will have a renewed appeal and will play a central role in the continuation of Western civilization in the digital age. So with this background, where are things today? I think we've seen some large organic movements. One is, as Americans have widely recognized the nature and stakes of the conflict we face, they've been making moves to realign their lives, whether it's away from companies, they leave companies that hate them for companies that are friendly to their values, schools, major changes related to schools, or certainly in some cases pushbacks at schools that should be more aligned. They actually moved to jurisdictions, lots of moves from blue states to red states, that they're moving away from those they recognize as threats to their way of life and toward friendly or at least non-hostile alternatives. And Bitcoin certainly reflects one such move, a move away from a hostile financial system and toward a new form of money that at least is not controlled by our enemies. We are, in a sense, returning to a state of nature, or you could say a state of true politics, a politics that really recognizes that there are fundamental threats to our way of life, rather than one where we all agree on the same goals, and really politics just consists of policy differences in terms of how to get there in a technocratic sense, which I would say is what, in many ways, the Republican-Democratic dynamic was in the previous era. So in such a state, in a state of nature, a natural instinct is to find and align with friends. And thus, without any central coordination, Americans across the country, across in many ways a range of ideological spectrums, have begun this realignment, moving, looking for alternatives, looking for friends, looking for new anchors and ideologies in terms of who even counts as their friend. So what is the way forward? While this cultural realignment is growing, it remains sporadic. Many people look for opportunities to truly orient their lives in a way that builds the world they want to live in. The central need of our day is to organize this movement and to channel these people and their efforts toward meaningful projects. So this goes to our work at New Founding. New Founding is an investment company harnessing this cultural realignment to build an alternative vision for America. We operate a set of business initiatives built around a core network of people who are all drawn to this vision. Overall, what we're aiming to do is we're aiming to unite Americans to build and acquire political, cultural, and economically meaningful resources to advance our way of life. A few notes about our approach and strategy. Why are we approaching it the way we're doing? I think the first one is our mission is statesmanship. So why then are we structured as a business, and why are we focused on the private sector? And again, for people in this room, for people focused on Bitcoin, I think many will intuitively grasp many of these points. But it's a major one that we want to answer as we explain our approach to people who may otherwise be focused in politics. First, what I'd say is the private sector endeavors that address a key need of the moment can rapidly compound power and resources in a way that is independent of and often disruptive to the legacy institutions where we face disadvantages. Bitcoin's a great example of that. Bitcoin has compounded an enormous amount of value, created an enormous amount of wealth, fully outside of the financial system, almost entirely outside of the financial system, where many of the people who have done very well in Bitcoin and built entire institutions would have faced enormous impediments if they tried to do similar things in the legacy financial system. Second, our movement needs a bench of people who are prepared to lead America into a new future. Government and conventional politics embody many of the structural impediments. Business, in contrast, offers many paths for talented people to quickly rise in and contribute to new organizations in ways that are less constrained by legacy impediments. Nor is the private sector even categorically separate from governance. So the digital domain tends to create monopolies that allow certain companies to exercise significant governance control. Going back to Google and the example of the algorithms. Whoever controls the Google algorithm in many ways is more powerful than probably any single senator even. Incredibly powerful legislative control. as these digital platforms mediate an ever larger share of our lives, they can grow into de facto governments. And Musk's acquisition of Twitter illustrates this. It was far more like the capture of a strategic domain by a feudal lord than like a traditional private equity deal. And the political consequences of his control and the debates that surrounded it clearly illustrate that this is really a geopolitical battle rather than simply a conventional private sector endeavor. Finally, what I'd say the private sector can serve as is it can serve as a strong platform for articulating a positive vision for our movement and for our society. This is a desperate need. People are extremely hungry for positive vision, for something that they can rally around and aspire to. And the right this has been a huge void of the right, going back decades and decades when so much of conservatism was summed up as standing athwart history and saying stop. There's good things to preserve, but that doesn't center us on thinking about what a positive vision that we should aim for is. Unlike the left's vision, ours is not state-centered. So we're not going to develop a red New Deal counterpart to their green New Deal. It's not going to be politicians who promulgate every aspect of that positive vision for our society and for our movement. In contrast, I think an investment company with a venture focus is well suited to help spearhead and amplify key components of an aspirational long-term vision for our movement and for our way of life in the digital age. Compared to many political strategies, our focus is more inward. We seek first to acquire resources for our people and our movement rather than immediately to transform the country. I believe this strategy is strategically prudent for two main reasons. First, those on the right today are a minority in number and in institutional power. We face far more powerful opponents sharply opposed to our way of life, and we must naturally use our capital, political, financial, etc., to prioritize our own protection. You actually see this in some very hot-button debates today around what the right's priorities are. It's moving its focus away from a lot of social issues, away from things like a national abortion ban, and toward things like immigration. I think these can be explained by recognizing that if we're a minority movement, we use our political capital first and foremost to protect ourselves from people who would destroy our way of life, to protect ourselves from people who would destroy our country, and ultimately even to protect red states and other places where we may have the ability to have, certainly red states and certainly private institutions, where we may still have the ability to actually have a more comprehensive vision of what we roll out. More importantly, in a world facing broad disruption of incumbent systems, this focus on building strong independent networks and institutions allows us not just to survive the turmoil, but to position ourselves for digital age leadership. In essence, rather than fighting to marginally sway decaying institutions that are largely stacked against us, we can invest that same energy in building the types of institutions that are designed to survive this transition period and ultimately to replace those legacy incumbents. We have some particular advantages here. We, particularly being conservatives, and I think especially Christians. With the legacy models of trust collapsing, people will naturally look for alternatives on which they can rebuild. When you have a massive delevering, think of the 2008 financial crisis, you see a collapse of a lot of institutions, but people naturally don't want to remain at that low trust delevered state. They desperately want to recohere around something that can restore some measure of the lost structure and some measure of the lost trust in society. The smaller trusted communities and networks, for example, local churches, fraternal orgs, even group chats that really proliferate on the right, that exist in many of our conservative spaces, will be strong contenders for this. And by embracing a more independent and inward-focused strategy today, we can position these institutions to offer something that is scarce and will be widely valued in the future. So in many ways, it's inward-focused strategically, tactically, but we're preparing to preserve something that will actually have broad societal level value that, with the right mindset, we could rapidly scale when the time is right. Thus, for us, an inward focus does not mean retreat, but rather a strategic focus on efforts that will offer outsized long-term impact. This reflects an exit to disrupt strategy that's popular in Silicon Valley, an exit from legacy institutions, but with the clear intent not just of building small parallel alternatives, but of building disruptive alternatives that can challenge legacy institutions for supremacy. In terms of technology, going to our sort of another pillar of the strategy and why we approach the way we do, we're particularly focused on understanding the political cultural dynamics that result from technological change and pursuing the corresponding opportunities, rather than trying to dominate the technologies themselves. I think AI is a good example of why the latter would not be viable for us. We just do not have the resources as a movement to win any sort of AI race. We are not going to dominate, we're not going to dominate technologies that cost tens of billions or hundreds of billions or more to be a leading player in. But we can understand the political cultural dynamics, and going back to my previous point, we can understand assets we have that are complements to these new technologies that will be able to be levered in that space and really give us a significant edge as these technological changes happen. Another aspect of technology is the digital domain is a central focus as we aim to acquire resources that will prove meaningful in the coming era. Territory, whether it's political, cultural, economic, within this domain extends beyond the technologies themselves to the networks that will dominate this space. An immediate example is influence on Twitter or on X, a platform whose nature allows messages to bypass legacy gatekeepers and reach a wide array of potential allies. And the primary digital territory that will shape the next era could be Bitcoin, which could affect everything from the financial system to the nature of the internet itself, in an era where the current trust systems break down and skin in the game becomes a necessary substitute. So the culture and the religion that shape Bitcoin could thus play a central role in shaping the entire digital age. In terms of how we specifically are approaching this, I won't go into great detail, but at a high level, New Founding combines a core network of people drawn to our vision with a set of business initiatives that build on and reinforce this network. The purpose of our network is to organize people who seek to invest their efforts to meaningfully advance our way of life, to build the America we want to live in. It thus serves to organize the cultural realignment movement that I mentioned earlier and identify people capable of and desirous of filling real concrete needs. Then we leverage this network to match the best talent to initiatives that will help capture politically, culturally, and economically meaningful resources. Concretely, there's a few businesses core businesses that we directly own. So our venture fund makes early stage investments into startups that particularly advance our vision. Examples include an ad network for the firearms space, an aligned pro-life health insurer, and a symbolic AI company building an unbiased foundation model well-suited to ultimately replacing the bureaucratic functions in these critical industries. Our real estate unit is developing the Highland Rim project, sort of aligned charter community, or a project centered on a town a few hours east of here that's drawing people from our network into a community that will model a distinct way of life aligned with our vision. Almost, I like to think of it as a venture approach to local community, a landscape where we're able to innovate in terms of what a community can look like in a way that's meaningfully different from the status quo. Beyond these core business units, we have a talent network focused on placing members of our network with aligned employers. American Reformer, which Jordan mentioned, is a nonprofit dedicated to promoting a vigorous Protestant Christian approach to the cultural challenges of our day, both a journal and then a number of initiatives actually focused on capturing institutions or reshaping, either from the outside or the inside, reshaping evangelical institutions, which should be the ones that we should have the strongest ability to actually capture and reshape rather than having to only play an outside game. As for Bitcoin itself, our project is complementary to many Bitcoin-specific efforts. We're building a set of institutions that I hope can play key roles in an alternative ecosystem, and the right currency for this ecosystem is clearly Bitcoin. Bitcoin's not yet viable as a currency for every transaction, but it's imperative that we get our people using Bitcoin, and two, become a meaningful force in the broader Bitcoin world, both for the sake of our own financial and digital sovereignty, but also so that we can become a meaningful force in the direction of Bitcoin, perhaps directly against some of the more transhuman forces that really want to use Bitcoin as a vehicle for what could end up being utopian solutions that, while different from the current system, embody some of the same problematic ideologies. Concretely, American Reformer is adding a Bitcoin wallet as a way to accept donations, particularly suitable use for traction for Bitcoin, because while ordinary transactions with Bitcoin can have unfavorable tax treatment, donations of appreciated assets can have particularly favorable treatment. Second, we're exploring a way to offer Bitcoin holders the opportunity to invest in the Highland Rim project, again, with vehicles that would be structurally favorable. Ultimately, what we're hoping is that this can be a significant hub, this community we're developing, a significant hub for Bitcoin use and for Bitcoin-based businesses. And a partner of mine, Josh Abatoy, is here and really focused on exploring how that intersection can be built out in more concrete ways. Our ultimate vision for New Founding fits more broadly into the Bitcoin adjacent world. You could think of New Founding as a network union, as described by Balaji Srinivasan. It's a network with a purpose, as opposed to a network simply defined by a capability or function, as many technology or product-driven networks are. As we organize people drawn to our vision into a network, we maintain this shared purpose. And as we orchestrate actions to further our purpose, the unity of the network is only reinforced. Such a network ideally can become a flywheel with enormous potential energy that can be directed to serve the interests of its members and to advance a shared purpose, and in many ways to solve collective action problems like embracing new uses of Bitcoin that require a number of people in a coherent commercial community to all adopt it at the same time. So to conclude, I'll touch on a few points about the ultimate vision, what we as a movement should be aiming for. Our mission is to advance the American way of life. As we transition to the digital age, this becomes a question not just of preservation and expansion, but of vision and definition. We must identify the virtues of our way of life that are definitively American, but that can transcend the past, transcend previous ages, previous technological paradigms, to become defining traits of our culture in the digital age. There's a few in particular that define our strategy and I think should define our movement. Our vision for America must be Christian. It need not be exclusively Christian, or there's room for people who are not Christian, but it must be fundamentally anchored to a Christian ethic and a Christian view of the world. A right detached from Christianity would no longer be right in any meaningful sense in the Western tradition. In contrast, our renewed Christian vision offers our movement a great opportunity to put forth an attractive alternative to the prevailing ideologies. A pro-Christian vision will also be pro-human. While both wokeism and transhumanism often underappreciate the human, they underappreciate what makes humans exceptional, and they underappreciate the fundamental goodness of our design, Christianity offers a full picture that is grounded in our understanding of God's creation of man in his own image. Technology. Technological innovation and the ambition behind it is particularly important in American culture. It has been important in American culture since our founding. Many people have noted that Americans are exceptionally friendly toward technological disruption. Again, as I noted earlier, there will be some tension with conservative impulses since technology can erode norms and traditions. This, along with the ideology of many current tech players, lead many on the right to fear technology. But we must develop the knowledge and the virtues to master technology and use it toward our ends. At the start, I described three macro trends that threaten the key elements of the current order. A viable successor to each of these must also address each of these. The solution to the cultural and political alienation that results from radical liberation has already been addressed, a renewed embrace of the American tradition of Christian ideals. The solution to the growing global disruption is household, community, regional, and national self-determination, a sort of fractal approach that recognizes that while outside connections will always remain, we can never be totally isolated, totally self-sufficient at any level, we should systematically favor the local, whether local to a geography or local to an aligned community, whenever feasible, in any sort of commercial interaction, in any sort of interaction. It's sort of a localism wherever possible that structurally reorients away from defaulting to globalism to defaulting to the local. Finally, the solution to the bureaucratic stagnation that results from managerialism is multifaceted. At core, it'll involve a combination of new frontiers, again, something that technology really enables, and organization models that are more dependent on ownership and skin in the game than on bureaucratic checks, enabling an elevation of the human spirit even in a complex world. Finally, we're focused on America, but our impact will not be limited to America. The internet, the defining medium of our era, is deeply American in ethos and design, and Americans, for good or ill, will heavily shape an era that's defined by the internet and digital technology. Western civilization is defined by its Christian heritage, and to the extent that it remains Western in any distinct sense, it will retain this Christian element, and Christians will help to shape it. In a sense, Americans, one way or the other, will shape the digital age. To the extent that they fork away from Christianity, they'll take a segment of Western civilization and fork away from our Western heritage in a way that ultimately converges with the CCP or otherwise ceases to be Western. So what remains of our civilization will be led by Americans, and it will be led by Christians, and it will be shaped in a Christian way. Thus, a resurgent movement that is both American and Christian will play a central role in shaping our civilization in the digital age. We're at an inflection point. While the turmoil and transition of coming decades will pose many perils, they offer great opportunity to people who can position themselves not just to survive this period, but to gain power in the new era. For Americans on the right, this prospect is particularly attractive. Legacy institutions are largely hostile and stacked against us. But those disruptive forces will open new opportunities that offer us the chance to advance and realize a positive alternative vision. The opportunity and need are clear. Major trends will transform the current era, but to help lead this transformation, we need resources and we need organization. Legacy institutions are bogged down by inertia and captured by political enemies. They're unfavorable places to raise leaders and to acquire resources. Our project offers a powerful avenue both to develop the class of people who can ultimately challenge the incumbent regime and to build and acquire the resources, territory, and institutions that will enable this effort. We must embrace this moment and the opportunities and demands that it presents. It's our duty to preserve the cultural values that we've inherited, and it's our birthright to lead Western civilization into the digital age. Thank you.
Thank you, Nate. Appreciate you, brother. Thank you.